Hello everyone and welcome to Slash Film Daily for October 18th, 2017. On today's show, we're going to be talking about a bunch of news, including the Sicario sequel, a Rogue One character returns for Star Wars Rebels, the problem with modern movies, according to David Fincher, and the possibility of a Dark Tower sequel. In the spoiler room at the end of this podcast, we'll be talking about a new Stranger Things fan theory that may predict what we're about to see in Stranger Things 2, the sequel to Stranger Things. And before that, we'll get to the mailbag, responding to our mailbag from yesterday. I'm Peter Sciretta, and joining me on today's podcast is Slash Film writer Ben Pearson.
Hey, what's up?
And Slash Film writer Chris Evangelista.
Hello.
Okay, guys, I scored tickets to Harry Potter and the Cursed Child in New York. I'm going there in March. I've spent more money than I think I've ever spent on one single day of entertainment. And, you know, that's pretty hard considering, you know, going to theme parks and whatnot. Yeah. But just for these tickets alone, it's nearing the $1,000 range for, you know, two tickets, because it's actually two parts. So we're seeing two separate plays in one day, which is going to be, pretty insane. Anyways, I just wanted to mention that the front of this, now that we're doing a water cooler segment. Yesterday on in the mailbag, we talked a little bit about does box office have any indicator on the quality of a film, and I think most of us agreed that it didn't. Or no, I think we all agreed that it didn't. Yeah. But I think HT was strongly in the camp that no one uses box office to determine if they want to go see a movie. And I think you were kind of in the middle of me and her, and I was like, I think people do. John D. has written in. He works at a mall theater, which he says gets a lot of the general public audience, and he wrote in, quote, I can tell you that I get asked every shift, what's the most popular movie? And if I recommend something, the first thing they ask is, quote, are a lot of people seeing it? If my answer is no, they'll reply 90% of the time, screw it. It must not be good then. So yes, the general public is, in my experience, does indeed decide if there's going to see a movie based on its popularity. Going back to your conversation last week, the other question I get asked a lot is, quote, do you have the Rotten Tomatoes scores printed? We don't. People are becoming much more aware of Rotten Tomatoes scores, and I can tell you how many refunds I gave to people who walked out of Mother screaming at me that the Rotten Tomatoes lied. But when I was in college, I managed a movie theater that played mostly indie and foreign movies, and none of these questions arose. So that's from John D., who wrote in to Peter at slashfilm.com. You can write in with your questions. Please leave your name and general geographic location in case we mention it on the air. Any thoughts on this, guys? Like, is this surprising that both people are asking for Rotten Tomato scores and, you know, asking what movies are doing well at the box office at the actual theater box office?
I talked about this a lot yesterday. I'm interested to hear Chris's thoughts.
I gotta say, this is depressing. I never thought it would get this bad, but I guess it is. That I guess I would say I am surprised that this many people are. I mean, I don't know how many people he's talking about. He says 90% of the time, but he's not saying how many people that is. But that is an alarming statistic. I mean, I know a lot of like older theater goers rely on reviews. Like, there's been a lot of times where I've been in a movie, and I've heard like older people arguing that, oh, it got great reviews, but I'm not enjoying the movie. So I mean, maybe on that level I knew about it, but I didn't know it was this widespread.
You know, it's a weird thing about Rotten Tomatoes. It's, when you talk to the general public about film criticism and film critics and reviews, it seems like a lot of them have this disdain for critics and, like, you know, I don't like the same things critics like, and like that kind of like attitude. But yet they, seem to flock to this Rotten Tomatoes score, which is based on the opinions of critics, which is strange. I would say this, when I go to restaurants, I often, sit down and I ask the waiter, what is the best thing here? It's not the most popular. I don't ask for the most popular. I ask, what is the best thing here? And more times than not, I'll order that, even if it's something I don't think sounds good, because, I trust the people that are around the food more often than, me, who is coming into this restaurant for the first time ever. But I think that's different than asking, someone at the ticket seller booth, what is the most popular thing here? I'd rather see the best thing than the most popular thing. So I don't know. I'm sure many of you will write in on this topic, and that's peter@slashfilm.com. Let's get into the news, though, guys. The Sicario sequel is we're learning more about that. Ben, you wrote this article for slashfilm.com. What do we know?
Yes, the sequel to Sicario, which Denis Villeneuve directed in 2015. It's this really awesome suspense action movie. If you've not seen it, it's really great. You should definitely check it out. The sequel is called Soldado, and filming has already wrapped on that, but it doesn't come out until next summer. But Josh Brolin is reprising his role from the first movie, and Benicio del Toro is coming back as well. Emily Blunt, who started the first film, is not going to be coming back for Soldado, but it's going to center around the male characters from the first movie. And Josh Brolin was recently asked, how the second movie turned out, since he just wrapped shooting on it. He basically compared it to how he felt when he was making the first film, which is when he was making Sicario, he thought that movie was only going to be okay, but it turned out to be, in his words, a really fucking good movie. I tend to agree with that. I love that movie. And he was asked for like a more direct comparison, what are we going to be expecting with Soldado? And he said, quote, I think it's just more severe, man, all the way around. I think the characters are more severe. I think the movie is more severe. I think it's just much bigger. It's just a bigger scope film. Like I said, when I saw it, it was like Sicario felt like a small movie to me, even though it was a very intimate movie. I've always said I don't understand why bigger movies can't be just as intimate, if not more intimate. Why do they have to be less emotional? I think Soldado is a perfect example of that. I think it's extremely emotional. I think it's extremely tense, and it deals with similar subject matter. So that's his quote on that. I am definitely looking forward to this film, even though Denis Villeneuve is not directing it. An Italian filmmaker named Stefano Sollima has stepped in to direct this sequel, but if it's more intense and more emotional and sort of like a bigger scope than Sicario, I can't even really wrap my head around what that's going to mean.
Yeah, and this director, Stefano, has done a bunch of films I've never seen, ACAB and Sabura. Chris, are those films you've seen?
No, I'm not familiar with those.
Yeah, for some reason, I feel like Sicario was elevated and was great because of Denis. And I don't know this. This is an unknown quantity of filmmaker. I'm still going into it, and I'm going to see it, but I'm less excited about it, without Denis being involved as director. Although, Brolin is saying all the right things. And, this wasn't intentional, but this is a great lead-in to the David Fincher piece of news, which is coming at the end of our news segment. So stay tuned for that. But let's move on from that to more sequels, because everybody wants to know about sequels. Idris Elba still believes that a Dark Tower sequel might happen. Chris, what do we know about this?
Right, so The Dark Tower, as everyone knows at this point, was not good, and it did not do well at the box office. It took in a little more than 100 million worldwide. It's got about 15% on Rotten Tomatoes, going back to Rotten Tomatoes again. So it seemed after that film came out and after everyone was disappointed in it, it seemed inevitable that there would not be a bunch of sequels of this film, even though it was originally planned as the first in a whole series of films, much like it's a series of books. And Idris Elba is saying basically that he'd prefer to do another Dark Tower movie, exploring more of the character. And he said there's definitely talks to try and do another one. So that's a direct quote from him. There's definitely talks So I don't know how serious those talks are. I don't know how far they'll get. I mean, maybe if the film surprisingly does huge on Blu-ray, which I doubt it will, but that might change things. But beyond that, I would not be surprised if we don't get another Dark Tower movie.
One thing that's surprising about Dark Tower, and I'm not sure if a lot of people know this, because this film was marketed as a big budget film, but it was made for only $60 million. Or supposedly. Who knows? We don't know budgets, but that's what the estimated budget of the movie is, $60 million. So at that budget, it's around, it's with home video and with television rights, it's around breaking even. I wouldn't consider that a success in any way, but no. It is possible for them to do sequels. It's just will they? And is there an appetite for more Dark Tower? Ben, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, that's the question, right? Is like the big problem with the first Dark Tower movie was that it tried to water down all of this, dense mythology and condense it into one movie, and it's sort of appeal to the broadest possible demographic. But in doing that, it alienated pretty much everyone, because nobody, it sanded the edges off so dramatically that there was nothing left. It's just a circle of a movie. There's just nothing there. So the idea of making a sequel, it's not like the people who saw the film are going to be excited about that, because there's nothing to get excited about. That movie was just such a nothing film. And it's like the Stephen King fans have probably learned their lesson after watching the first movie. So there may be some, masochists out there who have to put themselves through the experience of seeing a sequel just because, they're completists, or just to see for themselves, whether there's a market improvement there. But I just can't imagine the audience showing up again, or a bigger audience. A lot of times with sequels, it's like they hope that the DVD market and all that stuff will reach a larger audience over time, so that when the sequel comes out, more people will go out and see it in the theaters. But I just don't see that being the case for this.
And the person you're talking about is sitting on the line right here. Chris is a huge fan of Stephen King, right, Chris?
Oh yes, very big.
So if they do make a Dark Tower sequel, would you go see it if you had heard buzz that it is more of the same?
Oh, I mean, I'd probably have to see it for work, but I wouldn't be, jumping for joy to go see it. So yeah, especially if it's more of the same. I mean, and even if it wasn't, I probably would still be skeptical. If early buzz said, "Oh, they changed stuff and they made it better," I'd still be very skeptical, especially after that first film.
Yeah, see, we would have to make you go see it to add it to your complete ranking of all the Stephen King adaptations, which we publish on the site. But moving on. One of the characters in Rogue One, A Star Wars Story, was Saw Gerrera. He has appeared in the animated series Star Wars Rebels, and he will again make a return appearance on this this final season of Star Wars Rebels. Ben, what do we know?
Yes, Saw Gerrera, the militant extremist character played by Forrest Whitaker in Rogue One, showed up on an episode of Star Wars Rebels earlier this year called Ghosts of Geonosis, and that character is now coming back in a two-part episode called In the Name of the Rebellion, which airs this coming Monday, October 23rd. So Forrest Whitaker is coming back to do the voice of that, and there's a clip in the article that we wrote on Slash Film that you can watch of a hologram of Saw, talking to some rebellion people, Mon Mothma and some others. And there's like a bunch of photos and stuff that have come out of this. I have not watched Star Wars Rebels, so I can't really add too much to this conversation, but it's another way for them to loop this character back in to the larger mythos. And I know Kathleen Kennedy said around the time that Rogue One came out that she actually wanted Saw Gerrera to be in that movie more, but they ended up having to cut some of his appearance down for timing and stuff like that. So she wants to sort of explore that character further in the future. So this looks like one way to do that as Star Wars Rebels comes to an end.
Yeah, and this is the last season, last season of Star Wars Rebels. They're getting close to the period of where Rogue One and, A New Hope is coming in. By the end of the season, we assume that, the Jedi must die, and we know where this ends up. So they're answering a lot of questions. We've had some other stories on the site from showrunner Dave Filoni, producer, writer, director, talking about how they're going to be answering a lot of questions and how this season is a lot more serialized than previous seasons, which is awesome because this series is a great series when it does that kind of more developed storytelling, and it's not these episodes that are kind of like one shots. That's just kind of like it's a fun character episode, but it really doesn't further along the plot of this epic series. I'm really enjoying it. I recommend it, but there is a lot of those filler episodes, which is unfortunate, and that's, I think, one of the reasons why I didn't kind of invest myself in the Clone Wars, which was also by Filoni. But they're doing some really great work. I saw the last 2 episodes, which aired this past week, which was a 2-parter, and I don't know, some really powerful Star Wars storytelling. I highly recommend if anybody wants to check this out. I'm sure you could get the last 3 seasons pretty cheap on iTunes or something. So moving on, David Fincher's new show Mindhunter is on Netflix. I've been watching it. I'm 3 episodes in. Chris has watched the whole series and did a spoiler review on the site, which I have not read because I've not gotten up to that point yet. But David Fincher is doing press, which is rare for him. And in one of the press, he is explaining the problem with modern movies. Chris, what is he saying is the problem with modern cinema?
Right. So David Fincher did an interview with Financial Times, and he basically ran down what he thinks. Sorry about that. Sorry, my Alexa turned on. Sorry about that.
I wonder what Alexa thought you were trying to say that. I don't know. Okay, let's just go on. So what does David Fincher think is wrong with modern cinema?
Right. So in an interview with Financial Times, David Fincher says what he thinks is wrong with cinema today is there are no mid-level movies anymore. Everything is like a big studio tentpole. Everything's a superhero movie. Everything's a big action movie. And he says, he holds up All the President's Men as a great older example of where he says everything is character in that movie. Now movies are about saving the world from destruction. There aren't a lot of scenes in movies, even the ones I get to make, where anyone gets to muse about the why. So he's basically just saying everything now is more driven towards being bigger and louder, and there's not really a lot of room anymore for studio movies that are, again, middle grade. They're about normal people, I guess. I mean, there are still movies like that, but they're made by smaller, independent companies. You're not going to get a big studio movie like that anymore.
Well, it's going over to television. Like what you're seeing, what David Fincher is doing with Mindhunter is what I think that middle grade movie would have been, 10, 15 years ago, right?
Right, exactly. He says that too in the interview too. He says, I see Netflix as people who are bold enough and interested enough to build a playground between film and television. So, yeah, again, Netflix is like a place that's giving him a chance to do what he wants to do. And even with Mindhunter, he originally pitched that to HBO, and HBO turned it down. So even they, who for a while were, at the forefront of these sorts of dramas, even they didn't go for this, but Netflix apparently did.
Personally, I mean, I see this point of view, and I think other filmmakers have expressed this point of view elsewhere. But personally, I see this as a good thing, because I think that those kind of mid-level dramas work better when they're not constrained to 90 minutes or 100 minutes or 120 minutes. They work better as these kind of long-form things. I can't imagine watching Mindhunter as a movie. I can't imagine, experiencing a lot of the shows that I'm watching on television. I wouldn't want to see even something like Stranger Things, which does have, kind of world at stakes kind of bits. Like, I love being able to, live in that world, and like it doesn't feel like it needs to be rushed, and it feels like we can have some time with these characters and these situations and these problems, and we can suck it all in. Do you know what I mean? Like,
right? Yeah.
Ben, do you have any thoughts on this?
I think that's a mentality that has only come up, sort of with the rise of Netflix. I feel like when I was a kid and I would hear about a cool story, I would automatically go to the thought of, wow, I can't wait until this gets turned into a movie, or I would love to see this as a movie, not, oh, I can't wait until this gets adapted for TV. But I think you're right. I think there's, especially for stuff that's more character-centric and is not, as concentrated on spectacle and stuff like that, I typically tend to walk out of a movie thinking, man, I would love to spend more time with those characters, and TV shows have proven to be a really great way of doing that. High quality stuff like that, over the past few years. So I think that's a new mentality, or relatively speaking, but yeah, it seems to be sort of where we are right now.
Okay, right now, guys, we have finished the news. We're going to go to the spoiler room to talk about Stranger Things. So if you have not seen Stranger Things Season 1, you could clock out now. And also, this is speculation on Stranger Things Season 2, or Stranger Things 2 as they're calling it. If you do not want to, immerse yourself in some speculative theories, some fan theories on what might happen in the second season, we don't know anything. We're going based on, just the trailers and these fan theories. It's not like we are intentionally trying to spoil anything. So, if you want to dive in with us and, just theorize, join us. If not, we will see you tomorrow. Okay, so let's go into the spoiler room. Stranger Things, there's this new theory out that basically speculates how season 1 of the show could have set up and predicted everything that's going to happen in Stranger Things Season 2. Ben, you wrote this up for the site. Tell us about this theory.
Yes. So if you recall, the 8th and final episode of season 1 of Stranger Things ends with the gang of kids getting together and playing Dungeons & Dragons again. And they, instead of dealing with the Demogorgon as they have been sort of throughout the whole season, the sort of big bad in their fictional Dungeons & Dragons game is this creature called the Thessal Hydra, which is a multi-headed creature. And the theory that has sort of gained prominence in the past few days, sort of on the back of the new trailer. There's a lot of imagery in the new trailer that seems to sort of align with this theory. So I'll talk about that in a second. But the theory is basically that the Dungeons and Dragons game that the kids play in that episode is predicting the events of season 2. So what happens is they encounter the Thessal Hydra, and Will Byers, his character, has the opportunity to fireball the creature in order to take it out. And he sort of looks to his friends for approval, makes that decision, and rolls the correct number in order to, use this fireball spell on this creature. And that ends up winning the day, basically. And there are a couple of sort of lingering questions that the kids have in the game. They're like, oh man, that campaign was too short. What about the Lost Knight? What about the Proud Princess? What about those weird flowers in the cave? So at the time when I was watching it, I was just thinking that was sort of a clever commentary by the Duffer Brothers, the creators of the show, about how TV shows often don't necessarily resolve every single plot point that they introduce over the course of a season, but it could be foreshadowing for characters or sort of metaphorical titles that could be applied to characters or situations as we move forward into the upcoming second season. So,
and it should be mentioned that earlier on in that season, they did set up the Demogorgon and how the Demogorgon was going to be defeated in a game of D&D. So this isn't this isn't unprecedented in the series.
Right. Yeah, and that's how the entire concept of the Upside Down came about. Is 11 is in there with them playing Dungeons and Dragons, and she flips the board over and puts the Demogorgon there, and that's how they sort of come up with that term. So, so as far as the Thessalhydra itself goes, in Greek mythology, the Hydra is a multi-headed creature that Hercules fights, and he can't defeat it alone. So this is a key point. Every time he slices off one of the creature's heads, 2 more grow back in its place. And eventually, Hercules' nephew comes up with the way to defeat this thing, which is Hercules slices off the head, and then the nephew burns the stumps before another head can grow back. So that's how they ultimately end up sort of taking this thing down, and it illustrates like the power of teamwork and the importance of that, which I think are themes that Stranger Things has hit on before and will likely use again.
And we definitely see that shot in the trailer with all of them kind of in the room fighting at once in the Upside Down.
Yes.
It kind of brings to mind that when you say that.
Yeah, and so in Dungeons and Dragons mythology, the Thessalhydra is slightly different from the Hydra, but it's basically the same thing. It's also a multi-headed creature, and this one proliferates by infecting hosts with larvae, which is how if you remember from the end of season 1, Will Byers, basically, who's spent the whole season in the Upside Down, spits up this sort of worm creature. So he's been infected, and as we've seen in the trailers, he's sort of seeing these visions of the Upside Down, and he's, the worlds are, the lines are blurring between his realities. The idea that the Thessalhydra is also in Dungeons and Dragons world, it is designed within that world. It doesn't normally exist. So that could possibly hint at the idea that Martin Brenner and some of the guys at the Department of Energy, the human villains of Stranger Things, might have engineered this thing somehow. We're very much in the dark on what the Upside Down is, whether this world was created by humans or whether it's something that we're just tapping into. A lot of unanswered questions there. So that could be, this creature could be the result of an experiment or something by these guys. And if you remember from the trailers for season 2, there's this multi-tentacled thing in the sky, and that is being referred to as the Shadow Monster in this season. And the theory is that is the Thessalhydra. The fact that it's in mythology is destroyed by fire, sort of burning the stumps. There's a lot of imagery in the new trailers of Sheriff Hopper and other people, dressed up in hazmat suits with like flamethrowers and stuff like that. So like theoretically, maybe he uses those flamethrowers to, seal off the stumps of these heads or these tentacles or whatever as they come around. So that's a lot of it. And then the other things are those sort of unanswered questions that I mentioned before. The Lost Knight, maybe that's 11. Maybe she's lost in the Upside Down. Maybe she's, she's been sort of imbued with these powers to defeat her enemies. Maybe it's Hopper who's lost in his attempts to find meaning in the world.
What if it's Barb? What if she's still alive? No,
I guarantee there are people who think that, but that is definitely wrong. The Proud Princess, that might be 11 too, but I hope that character or that sort of nickname goes to Max, the new female character, just because I feel like that's a sort of a weird thing for 11 to have. And then the flowers in the cave, the other reference that is made in this video, that very well could be the eggs that Hopper found in the Upside Down, or it might have something to do with Dustin holding a bouquet of flowers that we saw in the season 2 trailer. And then the kids also are going through this tunnel that looks very much like a cave that presumably transports you from the regular world to the Upside Down world. So there's a lot of imagery there that you can sort of latch onto and sort of find meaning in as we wait for the season 2 premiere to come around. But what do you guys think about this?
I just want to say I kind of love that if this theory does pan out to be true, I kind of love that they put this in season 1 and kind of hid it in there, kind of like, Edgar Wright has done a couple times with his Easter eggs of like hiding the movie plot early on and explaining everything. usually get like a filmmaker when, a series is renewed, saying, coming on and be like, oh yeah, we have this grand plan, all this stuff. And it ends up after the fact not being that true. And it seems to me that the Duffer Brothers had really thought about this when they were going through season 1, that they had some plans of what would be next, which to me is exciting, because I don't want to see someone just, do something and not and put themselves in like kind of a corner and not know where they're going to go next with that. I want there to be a grand plan, which I've talked about previously on this podcast, and it seems like they have somewhat of a grand plan. Like, if this turns out to be true, it shows, it's them kind of putting it out there. Chris, any thoughts on this?
I agree. I love the idea that maybe they did plan this that extremely. I also love the idea that this show has just inspired that sort of fan reaction where people are able to actually sort of like dissect clues like that. It sort of reminds me of like the last time I remember a show inspiring that much, it was like Lost, which obviously didn't turn out that well in the end, but for a long time it was going really well. And I kind of love that this show is inspiring that. At the same time, I hope when season 3 rolls around, I hope at the end of season 2, they're not like, all right, let's play Dungeons and Dragons again. And they're setting, like, I hope they don't just keep setting it up the same way, because that's going to get a little tiring after a while.
Yeah, I think they're going to have to evolve. I've already suggested on this podcast that it would be great if they pulled an It and, fast forward, 10, 20 years into the future and did like, flashback, flash forward, which I guess is kind of like Lost too, in a way. Kind of format. I think that would be kind of cool to shake it up, because who knows where they're going to go. That we know that they have like 4 seasons supposedly planned out, 4 or 5 seasons, something like that.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Ben, any last thoughts on this?
Yeah, there are a couple more little pieces of evidence here that I thought were worth mentioning. So in that Dungeons and Dragons game from the 8th episode of season 1, Mike Wheeler, who is the dungeon master, describes the Thessal Hydra dying, and it says he reaches out its clawed hand for you one last time. And that sort of corresponds with imagery that we've seen in the new trailer of what looks to be a tentacled hand of the Thessal Hydra sort of reaching toward, out across a field toward a human figure. We're not really sure who it is. It might be Will. So that sort of aligns and goes along with this. And then also we see the shot of the kids wheeling these barrels through a field, like a junkyard area. Theoretically, they're filled with oil, which could, sort of be used to ignite a fire, which may end up, coming into play with the stumps and all of that kind of stuff. And then one more thing that I thought about when I was writing my trailer breakdown of the most recent Stranger Things 2 trailer. We've seen in the previous trailers this Thessal Hydra floating in the sky with red lightning all around it, right? But in the most recent trailer, that red lightning is gone. It's all blue now. It's all very, the color palette has completely changed around this creature. So I'm wondering if there are actually 2 of these things out there. One sort of an evil one, and then one that might be more benevolent. We haven't really seen anything that would indicate that yet, other than just that color shift between these trailers. But that would be sort of a fascinating thing, because it would paint the Upside Down as a place that's not just full of evil things, that good things could be mixed in there as well. So I don't know, just something to think about.
That is an interesting theory. I'm so curious to where they're taking this. When does Stranger Things season 2 premiere?
It is October 27th, so not very long at all.
So we only have to wait like another 9 days or something.
Yeah.
But it's going to be a long 9 days. When Stranger Things 2 comes out, how are you guys planning to do it? Are you planning on staying up midnight on that Thursday night, or I'm assuming it's a Thursday night, and binge watching it into the morning, or are you planning on watching it over that weekend? How are you? What are your plans?
Chris, what are you going to do?
I would like to stay up, but my wife wants to see it, so I'll probably have to wait for her to be to be supportive, and I'll wait for her. And probably Friday night when she comes home from work, we'll probably binge it all through the weekend.
I think I'm gonna do the exact same thing.
Yeah, I think that's probably the way to go. Although, not to bring spoilers back into this conversation, and from the guy that says that spoilers don't spoil anything, but I'm kind of a bit worried that people are going to be assholes and go online and, be talking about it in my feeds and stuff that Friday. And I know it won't ruin it for me, but I don't know.
Peter, I'm sensing a trend here. You seem to be always coming with the for the guy who says spoilers don't matter, but this kind of thing. I don't know. There might be something to it.
I know. I just think sometimes we go to these press screenings and on the screen, instead of like those movie ads that are really annoying, they'll have the trailer playing, over and over and over again. And as much as I love trailers and I love to defend trailers, I don't need to be watching the trailer over and over and over again minutes before I see the movie. And that's kind of the way I feel about this, is if I'm going to watch Stranger Things that weekend, I don't need to have these, gifs of people dying in my feed and whatever. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I feel like there's a difference between...
All right, Peter, just keep telling yourself that.
Okay, guys. I think it's time to call it a day. Chris, where can we find more of your work online?
I am at slashfilm.com, and you can find me on Twitter at Evangelista413.
Ben, what about you?
And you can find me writing every day at slashfilm as well, and you can find me on Twitter at Ben Pears.
You can find me at slashfilm. You can find all these articles at slashfilm.com. You can find me on Twitter at slashfilm. This podcast is published every weekday on iTunes, Google Play, Overcast, all the popular podcast apps, and slashfilm.com, which we have a new mobile website, which I hope you check out and take it for a spin. We're still working out the kinks, but we've gotten a lot of great feedback thus far. If you like this podcast, please go to iTunes, give us a rating, give us a review, tell your friends about this on social media. That all helps us out quite a bit, and we will see you tomorrow.